I'm going to show you today how to draw a Toyota Celica vintage sports car using one-point perspective. So drawing a car straight on is pretty simple, but drawing one at an angle is a whole nother story. It gets a lot more complicated. One way that you can make it easier for yourself is by drawing it using one-point perspective. One-point perspective is basically where all of your lines line up with a vanishing point. Let's get started. I have an A3 paper, I have a big ruler, I have drawn a horizon line, and I have put a vanishing point on the far end of my horizon line. At what angle is my car? Is my car going to be at this angle? That's a pretty strong angle. Or is my car going to be at this angle? I think I'm going to go with something like that. So my first line is going to indicate where my wheels are. You see that I've lined this up with my vanishing point. You want to decide how big is your car going to be, and in that respect, how big is your wheel going to be. I want my wheel to be about this big, my front wheel. So that's my front wheel. Now, remember that my car is at an angle, which means my wheel is also at an angle. So my wheel is not going to be a perfect circle. It's actually going to be slightly more oval looking because it's angled backwards. But we can adjust that later. To establish where my second wheel is, you want to create about another 2.5 to 3 wheels in between for your second wheel. Okay, so my second wheel is going to be about here. You want to have the right distance. You don't want to have a car that's too long or too short. Since this is the top of my first wheel, I'm going to line that up with my vanishing point. And my second wheel in the back is going to fit within that space. You see how this line and that line, both of my wheels are within that space. Now on sports cars, the base of the car is pretty low. And you always want to have reference photos. You always want to have pictures from the internet that you can look at. In my reference photo, I'm seeing that the base of my car is quite low. It's pretty low down against the wheel. So I'm drawing that against the vanishing point. I'm going to connect it to the front. This is going to be kind of the front of my car. And I might as well connect it to the back as well. Although I'm seeing that on my reference photo, the back of my car is actually a little higher and it's curved up a little bit. The top of my car above the wheel, I'm seeing on my reference photo, it's about that high from the front wheel. So I'm just going to draw, just to help me out, another line. And I know that this is going to be the top of my car. Now I'm going to refine that line later. But this is helping me establish some of the other features in my car. The side window is here. And I can add in some of the frame, that's the window frame. And I can see that there's that little peaky back window is about there. Now this is going to be the top of my window. I'm going to use the vanishing point again to really help me get that right. That's the top of my window. It's a little more curved in reality, so I can curve that out a little bit, but this line is helping me establish that. This is going to be the front window. The side of that front window comes up from about here at my wheel. I'm going to draw that in at that angle. I'm going to curve this down a little bit because in the photo it's actually a little bit curved. And then there's the roof of my car. Because it's a sports car, it doesn't have a whole lot of roof, but it has a little bit of a roof, so I'm also going to line that up. And then I'm going to round that out, but I'm using this guideline to help me establish the roof. And now that I have these lines here, I can just bring this down and create that sort of rounded shape. That's the back of my car. And at any point, you can keep on refining your shapes. Now I'm seeing that this is a little bit more curved that way. You often see this with sports cars, is that the wheel is slightly hidden underneath the frame of the car. This is all shadowed back here because this is behind my wheel. And I'll do the same thing here. This is the back, the shadowy area, kind of the inside of the frame. And then the front of this wheel is also slightly covered. Now let's connect this frame. Where is this frame going? It's kind of heading up this way a little bit. You could imagine that there is another dot over here somewhere that all these lines are connecting with. I mean, essentially that would be 2-point perspective, but we can also just ignore 2-point perspective right now. That's a little more complicated. So we're just gonna wing it. I'm thinking the front of my car, it has this real sporty kind of look. It's rounded, it's quite low. This is where you're just using your power of observation. That's good enough, I think. There's no detail here, but I've established a little bit the shape. So where's that second wheel? It's about here. Now there's a door back here. There's only one door on this model. So the bottom of the door, again, use your vanishing point, is just above the base, and it's about as wide as the window. And you want to get the shape right. It kind of curves in a little bit like this. And then again, I'm aligning the top up with the vanishing point. And I'm creating the door. There's my door handle. This model also has, there's a little kind of decorative looking box in the front. Maybe that's where the gas is. I'm going to create these frames. I'm going to double up on these frames here. This is the window frame. You can refine all your shapes here. This is a bit rounded. I'm seeing actually the door, it's a little sportier. It's a bit rounded. It's a little more rounded than it is angular. Sports cars have a lot of rounded shapes that makes them more aerodynamic, I suppose. So now I can work on the wheel. This is the tire, so the full width of this is the tire. You do see some of the front of it. It's a thick tire. Sports cars also have thick tires. And then there's the hubcap in the middle. You can do any kind of patterning you want here. And then you'll do the same patterning in the back. I think I'm going to pull this line down a bit more because I want the frame to be even lower over my wheel. That's going to make it look even more sporty. I'm going to create that grille here. There's the grille on the front. There's this really large light, which has kind of a semicircle shape with a flat edge. Then there's some smaller lights. The other light on the opposite side we don't see. The very cool feature it has these lights that you can open that kind of pop up. Now you want to make sure you get the second one in the right spot. Actually, you can see that it's kind of going off of the frame back here, and that's because of the angle, and it's kind of protruding out over the frame back here. I'm first going to erase all of these guidelines. So now that I've erased my unwanted lines, I'm really going to go in there and carefully refine the lines that I do want. You want to have areas of really strong contrast. In all your art, really. You want contrast, you want light, you want shadow. That gives a lot of dimension to your art. So you can add some kind of different textures and play around with maybe hatching and cross hatching down here. The other thing you can do if you have a soft pencil like I do is you can just smudge really easily with your finger. You can use a blending stub for that as well. You want to smudge lightly where there's a lighter shadow and use more pressure on your pencil where there's a darker shadow. Remember, when you're shading something that's rounded, you want to use your pencil in that same direction. So your shading, mimicking or copying the shape of the object. Definitely a strong shadow underneath. Let's go back here to my back wheel. So the part underneath I'm shadowing. There's also a good shadow underneath my car. Always look at your reference photo. I'm looking at a particular photo. You will probably be looking at a different photo in a different car, possibly as well. I'm going to refine this. This to me looks a little darker now. This grill here in the front, the whole thing is in shadow because it's an internal grid, really. Let's work on these pop-up lights here. And then this one. All right, let's go to the window. Now the window's tricky because it's reflective. So you could either lightly create a little bit of a smudge effect to indicate reflective glass. Sometimes we do glass just by doing these slightly angled lines. You definitely want to leave a lot of light, so you don't want to shade everything. So I've gotten a kneaded eraser. These are a little bit more accurate because you can create a point with them. So if you have a kneaded eraser, that is a great thing to use anytime you're using graphite. But if you don't have one, any old eraser will do the job. I also got a blending stub. If you don't have a blending stub, you can use your finger. So I'm going to pull up with my eraser some of those highlights again. I'm going to keep a little bit of a line here that kind of indicates where the side of my car is. I think that that creates good dimension. And then I might shade just a little bit. Those lights are going to be pretty white because they are reflective. So I don't want too much shadowing there. But with my blending stub, I might create a little shadow just along the back, create some dimension. I think the window is too shadowy, so I'm going to pull up some of the graphite in my window. Here you can create these sort of light window reflection with a pointed eraser. You can kind of pull that up a little bit. I'm going to create a little shadow around the door where it opens and closes. There's always going to be a shadow there. I'm going to pull up some of that highlight on my wheel now. You can see that I'm regularly creating a point on my eraser. I'm almost like using my eraser like a drawing tool. Keep in mind that the hubcap part itself is metal, and metal is very reflective. Now let's play around a little bit with the shadow underneath. Remember, anytime you're doing a shadow, the shadow is really intense right where the object is sitting. And then as the shadow moves away from the object, it gets a lot lighter. So the wheel is firmly on the ground. So it's going to be very dark there. The car is casting a shadow here underneath, but in the back, you can actually see the light from the opposite side of the car. So I'm going to leave that light. This shadow is connecting to the opposite wheel. This wheel is also firmly on the ground. And then this shadow continues to pull back. Now let's see what we can do with our blending stub. Now we did stupidly erase our horizon line, which you never want to do because it's going to look like your car's floating. So I'm actually going to use the same horizon line that I used earlier. There, you can even play around with that horizon line shadow as well a little bit. So I might again deepen some of these lines. Okay, before I get too carried away, I'm just going to leave it there. I think this is a pretty good start, and you can certainly keep working on it, and you can certainly do 100 more cars and get more practice, which I would highly recommend. I know I need to get more practice. I hope this has given you some tips. So remember, you want to start with your vanishing point, on the horizon. Start with a wheel, draw to the vanishing point from the top of the wheel and the bottom of the wheel. Decide where your second wheel goes. Remember, it's about almost 3 wheels apart. In fact, I would make it even a little bit less because my car looks a little bit too wide. All your parts are going to line up with the vanishing point, right? That's the magic of using one-point perspective. It really helps you establish angles. So you can play around with this as much as you want. All right, so this is my vintage sports car. You could add a splash of watercolor in the back here and create a really good contrast with bright colors, and then leave your car white, or just leave it the way it is. You could take some colored pencils and add some color to it, however you want to proceed. Good luck and have fun.